Hello and welcome everybody to this very special event, the end of the calendar year of Sid's Enlightenment Experience. First, I want to thank everyone, all the guests that we've invited for turning up, and everyone else who's turned up just to get a part or be a part of the feeling and celebrate this understanding, which has profoundly changed my life. And I know it's touched everyone on this calling to some degree. And yeah, let me first touch on how honored I am just to be hosting this. Coming from maybe 5 years ago, I would look and I would never be think I'd be doing something like this. And it's all to do with the same thing what we're here to celebrate. That feeling that I've been following. And how that's shown up for me. And maybe we can touch on how that showed up for some people who knew Sid and that truth. Because that's what I've seen. I've been listening to Sid today, and it's that truth that he spoke from, that truth that he knew. And when you hear that and you feel that and that resonates with you, it can impact us on all different types of levels. And when that truth hits us and impacts us, we sort of come back a little bit different to all different degrees. And when we talk about this 50th year of Sid's uncovering of this understanding, we're not talking about Sid the man. We're talking about the message. And that true message, that message of truth, that 50 years later, well, it wasn't 50 years, I got this understanding 5 years ago. So 45 years later, me personally, I know I feel that same truth. And when I hear stories of people that's been impacted, I feel that same truth. So if we can always take it back to Sid and his message and how it speaks to me today in 2023, that truth resonates with me and has resonated with so many people around the world and continues to resonate with people. And after 50 years, we take a stock and look at where we are now and how that feeling is motivating people to do things, motivating people to just be able to show up different, motivating people to make change. And we can even make change just by showing up different. I think that's the thing that Sid always pointed to as well. Because if you look at it, here's a man, a welder, with no degree of education, had an experience. And people clearly said that this man was enlightened just by the way he showed up. He didn't talk about it, he was it. He showed up from that space. And the message that he pointed us all to was that he wasn't special. He says we're all enlightened. And it's that truth that when we hear that on some degree or some sort of level, that's what impacts us. That's what produces that feeling. That when I hear people that's been impacted talk about the feeling, I don't know their life, I don't know what they've been through, but I know that feeling, what they're talking about. Like I said, it was first articulated or first uncovered, and there's so many words that people would use. But today I'll just try to encourage us all to sort of forget the words, look past the words, and explore the feeling. Yeah, like I said, for me, it's an honor to be here and have so many people I've seen, heard, not everybody I know, but I know that we're all connected. And that again is that truth that Sid spoke of. That connection, where people who knew him would often tell stories of him telling to them to always look to themselves. And I thank all of you that was around him and heard it on that degree of truth on some level and have taken it and done what you've done with it. Like I shared before somewhere, that has enabled it to find its way to me. And when I hear so many different stories on how this understanding found its way to them, that's exactly what happens. This is something what finds us, because we are it. And when we're prepared to listen to that truth, it impacts us on levels that sometimes we don't even know how we're showing up. We just know we're following that feeling. And like I said, it's just so beautiful to be here in this feeling, in this space. So many beautiful faces. Like I said, some I know, some I don't know. But today I'll just again encourage us to just bask in the feeling. And hear from some stories from a few years ago that, like Sid said, when they're talking in the power of their stories, I hear myself in that story. If I hear myself in that story, then when I share, I'm sharing for everybody. Because we are truly connected through the thing we're going to discuss now, the feeling. I'm going to open it up to some people who knew Sid, and I'm going to ask a question, because how this goes as well, is set out to go through the feeling, because that's what we're going to touch on today, the feeling. And how that first showed up for everybody. And then maybe touch on how that impacted people into action, however that showed up. And then maybe finish on what it's going to look like for the next 50. And what we can all get inspired to do. And also during the time, we're going to open up the chat. So if anyone's got any questions, they can put it in the chat. And we might get time at the end to put the questions to the guys who knew Sid. But everything what I just said as well, this is just a celebration. So it's just about having fun. And that is just a loose structure of how this is going to go. But as long as we have fun, then it doesn't matter. So the first question I'm going to open up to is maybe the first time you encountered Sid, or the first time you saw Sid, and maybe where your head was at the time. So was you enthusiastic to see him, or was you dragged along by somebody that you didn't really want to be there? And when was the first time that truth hit you? Or that feeling? I'm going to open it up to guys if you want to just indicate to me if you want to share maybe the first time you met Sid. And maybe have a little funny story about how it impacted you.
Well, I can say something. I'm Keith Blevins, and I met Sid in 1976, I believe, or 77, early in 77. But the first time I met him, the first thing he said to me we were mingling before he spoke, and he said, the first thing he said was, we've been waiting for you. And I thought, what a, like, I didn't know what I thought, you don't even know who I am. And I don't know if he knew who I was or not, really. But he was, I think that indicated his willingness to share, like we're doing here. Like he was so willing to share this with the world, because he knew that once it got, more and more, you might say, off island, it would grow exponentially, and that's exactly what's happened. So that's what I'll say. Thank you.
No, thank you for that, Keith.
You're welcome.
Harry, you want to say something?
Oh, okay. The before the psychologist came, we were all, most of us were what you called almost the biggest losers in the world. But he had no choice but to accept whoever came. And when what Keith is alluding to is it was a stage that happened in the three principles. But before that, we were listening. In my first experience, it was a gathering, all hippies in the New Age, all talking about different trips, and I was in tarot cards. And there was a little sign about that big, and it was on this one or two streets, and it said that a welder was going to talk about truth. And I sort of laughed and said, what is he going to do? He's going to teach us to put two pipes together? And we went to the gathering, and it was all these trips, and it was noisy, and nobody was listening. And Sid came on with a group of maybe 10, 12 people, which were the number of people who were listening to him. And the whole place stopped. Everything went quiet. And all he talked about was watch your beliefs. Be careful about your beliefs, because there were a lot of beliefs there. And the only thing I experienced was that Sid's enlightened. I didn't hear anything, but he's enlightened. And that's what I was looking for. That's what I was looking for, a spiritual answer. I wasn't looking for, I had problems. That's the psychologist. They dealt with that. But we were dealing with what the spiritual reality, and of course they were talking about a spiritual healing. I'm not suggesting that they didn't know what they were talking about. But the most amazing thing, and this is the way truth shares, my past wife, she had an experience where there was nothingness or oneness. And I'm sitting beside her, and I'm the boss of our relationship. Because if you know me, you probably could figure that one out. And she had 100% transformation. She started talking. I couldn't understand what she was saying. She was talking about the spiritual reality because she had experienced nothingness. And that impacted me. I didn't like it because I was threatened by who I am. But that transformed, and that took us to Salt Spring Island. And when we met Sid for the first time, he was dressed as beautifully. He and Barb were so beautiful, so loving, so caring. And I'm just going to mention one little thing. And then my daughter, my wife, she asked Sid a question, and she said, "Well, you're saying the same thing as our tarot card teacher." And he said, "No, I'm not." And she said, "Well, how do you know?" He says, "I can see it in you." And that's the way Sid was. He could see it in us. I just leave it like that. I just want to say one more thing, Derek. Sorry, I don't want to talk so much, but Derek, I don't agree with you that it's just the man was the living proof of what he was teaching. And as a friend, I can never, ever, ever look back on that as not one of his major contributions to who I am.
Yeah, sorry about that. I must have I must have misspoke because I was that's the same thing I was pondering on earlier, that how he showed up is exactly what he was talking about. And he was the example of what he's talking about. And that's why I have to respect you guys so much, because at that time he must have looked like such a bright beacon, shining light of truth that just needs to be followed like a moth to the light. I need to follow this. But that light is just telling you the same light that you think you're following over here is within you. And that is the message. That is the message that will never die, that will never pass, that will stay alive. And I felt that, and I feel that every time you guys talk.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Cross.
I love so much what you said, Harry, about just how deeply you were touched and how he could see it in you. And I continue to be struck by how many people say that they didn't find Sid or the principles, but Sid or the principles found them. And when you say, you know, there was a little sign on the street, and it you know, it just occurs to me that you were pulled to read it and pulled to go. And I don't know, I'd love to hear a little bit about that from other people too.
I'd like to jump in the pool. I met Sid in 1974 summer. There was no group. I was on my journey. I didn't know it. I was not searching. At least I did not know I was searching. You know, it's a long story. I'm not going to tell the whole story or get bogged that way. But I was lost. I was on this pacing trip around and around for 3 hours, and what I thought I was looking for human contact. I was trying to make eye contact with people. This wasn't happening. But at any rate, some new passengers came onto the ferry, and you know, when I walked into the stateroom from the back, I saw this new couple, and I was drawn to them. I had to see, you know, later on, maybe a year later, Sid asked. We were in the car together going over to Victoria, and he said, "What did you see? What did you see that first night?" Which really happened well after this incident in the night, and I had no answer. I didn't know what I'd heard, and there was nothing that he had said that stuck. But now I know it was the feeling that I saw. And the feeling was love. I saw two people in love from the back, middle-aged. I had to find out. I walked around farther. I went in front of them. I paused, and I had a real good look. And they were in love. They were tired. It was late at night. They were on a dark boat home, and they were not, to my knowledge, aware of me. And I walked on. And what was the next thing that happened was really significant, and I didn't quite realize why. But our insights. When you read a book, any of Sid's books, and you think you've read it, and then you go back 6 months later or a couple of months later and you read it, and I haven't read it because I don't know, I never saw any of this before, and so what you're doing is you're indicating your level of consciousness has changed, and you're open to more than you were last time you read it, and regarding that little incident of observation, let's call it, in my reality, and that seeing of love, that was the message. And before I finished walking the next round, I was sitting down. I stopped walking. I was not aware of this. I've told this story many, many times, and I'm just becoming more and more aware that it was love that I saw. It was a feeling that touched me, and I changed in that moment. And I had, that's all I know about it. The journey ended. I got off the boat and I had no ride home, and it was midnight, and it was dark, except for where the lights of the ferry parking lot were. And I stuck out my thumb, and this old truck pulled over, and this couple was the same couple, and I got in. And we had about a 10 to 15 minute ride. I lived on his way home, on their way home. And when we got to my place, which was an unfinished sort of log cabin with, a garden hose in there for running water, and a long extension cord from the neighbor, which the plug had been pulled on. And so, at any rate, what possessed me to insist that this couple come on in well after midnight, wake my wife up, and sit around, introduce them, and sit around talking? I wasn't looking for an enlightened man. I was just coming home, a failure. And here I was, excited, animated. I brought them in. I woke Pam up, who became in those early years and right up to the Sid's passing, somebody that was devoted to Sid, and that Sid responded to as a friend. It was a feeling. That's it. I know it was the feeling. There was conversation going on. I can't remember any of it. I was, what was it? Sid had not spoken to any group. He had tried to talk to his workmates. He had now moved to Salt Spring Island 10 months later, after his experience, but nobody in the work was picking this up. Ken and Elsie hadn't picked it up yet. Let's face it, if you're working with a guy who only quit school when he was 14 years of age and is a nice guy, but he's not exceptional in this consciousness way that we have of checking things out these days, both within ourselves and others. He was this ordinary guy, but he talked well beyond what his appearance was. But I had no idea what he was saying. I mean, Sid brought up the word Satori. I had no idea what he was talking about. And enlightenment, good Lord, the idea of enlightenment, what was that? That's where I was. We had no idea what enlightenment was. Here's my idea of enlightenment. A couple of weeks earlier, we'd gotten to know Jim and Judy Wallace, Jim had quit his law practice and moved into a teepee. I hope he's here to share, you know, his experiences. But I'd gone up to the teepee with him one day, and when we went in, there was a book by some, you know, East Indian master, and Jim tried to explain to me that this fellow could manifest. He was dead, you know, 50 years, but he would manifest and guide his followers. And you know, good Lord, that's ridiculous. And so I thought of that when Sid started talking about enlightenment. That was my idea of what enlightenment was and my experience of it. And he perked up. He wasn't necessarily, you know, not that he was interested in the book, but he had a feeling already of Jim and Judy Wallace. And part of his reason, you know, his reason for being on the island was nobody could see him new in Nanaimo. There was nobody. He tried for 10 months. You know, to my knowledge, the people that caught it was his wife Barb, who caught it right away, and Mary, Grandma Mary, a little bit, and Barb's brother Dave and his wife Carol, you know, a little bit, but really, there was nothing written and there was no talks done. And Sid had left Nanaimo to be on Salt Spring to start fresh. And so, you know, that was how that worked. He was there for about 2 to 3 hours. One thing he said to me, it really, he took me aside for a minute or something, or we stood up and we're walking about, and he was asking for friends. He was concerned about Barb. Barb was nervous about moving to the island, that they wouldn't have any friends over there. And out of this happenstance of picking up a hitchhiker and coming into the place at midnight and beyond midnight and spending 2 or 3 hours, you know, we were candidates. And so they had invited us over the next day, and we went. And we thought, you know, they're a little old for us, but we also needed friends. We'd only been on Salt Spring about 3 months. So that's how we started with them, not really knowing. And he was talking about getting a group together, and that, you know, came to be. A couple months later, he had put an ad in the local newspaper, weekly, and asked for, you know, would like to start an awareness group on Friday nights, and if you're interested, here's my phone number, and here's the biggie. This group will be conducted by someone who is himself enlightened. And that was like a lightning rod to those people that might be interested. And so that evening was held at Sid and Barb's wonderful home, the home that anybody who's been in there in those days, describe as the most beautiful place that they'd ever been, and not an ostentatious place in that way, or the, you know, the way a man of wealth would have it, but a place that was carefully created and full of love and full of energy. And energy was the talk. The 3 principles were talked about, but there was never a package like happened later. He would talk about thought in isolation. He would talk about consciousness, again, in isolation, and he would talk about mind in the same way. So, you know, this night appeared. We went. We brought a friend. Bill and Linda Quiring were there. They brought a friend. You know, Wallace's came. We had brought them. And we had already been out to visit them prior to this. Sid and Barb and us went out to the teepee and met Jim and Judy, and they were intrigued. So that, you know, that night happened. There was about 20 people there. About 10 of them were people that already knew Sid, like we were, and the other 10 were challengers. What makes you think you can say you're enlightened? Who the hell are you? You know, this asking the questions. In retrospect, I can't say the night went smooth, you know, smashingly. It was not the embrace that he might have hoped, but of course he had been used. He'd already had 10 months of people not getting it. But as a result, there was a Friday night group that formed, which we were privileged to be part of, and that was the seeds. And about 6 months later, something I would put it in the next January, as a result of Linda Quiring writing a book with Sid, Island of Knowledge, the first, you know, impersonal sharing that was out there, you know, reaching out to anybody and everybody, not somebody. They set up this first public talk, the New Age Center in Vancouver, and Sid wanted us there, so we were there. Wallace's were there. They hadn't ever intended to even know about it, but they found out about it, you know, the day before. And if they're here, they can tell they're part of it. But they were there, and I'm trying to think of who else. You know, Dave and Carol from Barb's brother, Dave and Carol, I believe, were there. They were living on Main Island. That's where Sid had been the night I met him. And Sid blew our minds, blew everybody's mind in the place. It was incredible, an incredible meeting. That's all I can say about it. I have no specific memories of any of these meetings except that they were all wonderful. And by the way, we were, from hearing truth, we were let's say blown away, and let's say high as kites. We were so full of love. The evening ended with embraces with everyone in the room. And I might say the Friday nights all ended the same way, and Sid and Barb would greet us, say goodbye at the door as a couple, and send us on our way after the Friday night. And we would be flying. You almost thought you had wings. You were floating. The feeling was so incredible. And that was what we were getting. We had no idea in words what we were getting, but we were getting this incredible feeling of love, this incredible energy. And as we would leave and do that last embrace with Sid and Barb, and everybody would be commenting on how great it was and what, you know, and he would say, all right, now you've got the energy, go out and share it, give it away. And we did it without even listening to that. We did it because we had no choice. We would wake up on Saturday morning absolutely beside ourselves with that feeling. And we had two kids then, the third hadn't yet been born, and we'd throw them in the back of the car and we'd jump in that car and we'd start doing whatever you might do on a Saturday morning on Salt Spring. And we would, every time we stopped, didn't matter if they knew about Sid or they didn't know about Sid, and we didn't talk about it. We just got out and hugged them and asked about what they were doing and got into theirs. And if they asked us, we would share whatever it was. And it was an incredible experience. You know, that was what the early days were like. And it went to that meeting in Vancouver, and before you knew it, you know, that meeting in Vancouver at the New Age Center brought in so many people that actually turned around and moved to Salt Spring Island within a few weeks. They were, you know, wow, I gotta get more of this. What's going on? And part of that also was the entourage. Sid wanted us there. He knew we had changed. He knew that we'd become irresistible. People were walking away, you know, flying from meeting us. we were the product. We were already the product of hearing truth. We didn't know it, but I know it now. Anyway, I could go on and on and on, and I'll talk again if anybody has any questions or wants to lead it. I have had it in those years. Remember, I'm talking about 1974. His experience was a year before, and he had not held a group until that one. And he was learning how to share. He was learning how to put it out, and the ramifications was it that nobody knew why, but he knew that he wanted psychologists because he was in the big picture. How do you help alleviate human suffering with the law, with everybody being lost and not having any understanding of how life works, how humanity grows, why we're here? And just prior to his experience, he had been in a psychological setting, and he saw, I'm just about finished, but he saw psychologists who were equally lost as their patients, but were, unselfishly trying to help. So his experience included that direction for his truth to be delivered, because common sense says if you can convert, to use a word, or share enough that people grow in consciousness that they can share it, and they're psychologists, and then they've got a world around them that gives them permission to impart this knowledge. Because if you're not ready, you might run away from the truth, or you might resent somebody hounding you, apparently, to try to help you as if they know something you don't know. So psychologists are the perfect subgroup to employ in this sharing of these three principles. Okay, folks, I'll stop there. But I may come in again if anybody's interested, but everybody else deserves some time. Yeah, Raj is right.
No, thank you for that, Jim. And for me personally, I want to thank you for kind of grounding me in taking it back to the time before groups and before tapes, when you just had that feeling. And the same thing that you talk about when you was in the car is that feeling. What made you bring him home to your missus, and that feeling, and what made you show up at group, that feeling. And that thing about the end of group when we was all hugging up, that sounds like one of our prison groups, Jim. So it's the same feeling that was going on there. It's the same thing what I've experienced. And in prison, we don't do that. You don't hug people at the end of groups. You don't. That's a no-no. But somehow we was doing it. So I know what you're talking about. It's just an amazement to know that from there to where we are now, and all of the projects that are going on all over the world came from that from that feeling. And then you're also alluding to how he wanted you to be there. He just wanted people that had changed, because he knew that, like him, they could be ground zero. Just by how you show up is how you change people. And if I keep those people around me with no plan, just people who can see a little bit of what I've seen.
Sure.
That's how we change the world. And you've humbled me just to know, like I said, exactly everything that's going on around the world right now, with this feeling, with this truth that resonates with every single human being on this planet. It's just about just having that space to not run away from it and just be brave enough to sort of have a look into it. And I think you touched on that beautifully, Jim. So thank you for that share.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you, Bob, for your patience. You want to come in now? You had your hand up a little while.
Yes. It was interesting. What Jim was saying brought back some incredible memories for me. I ended up getting a job to look after a cat in a cottage on Main Island. I met this woman at this party, and she couldn't do it. And I said, where's Main Island? So anyway, I found out the house, I found the cat. And as it turns out, Chip and Jan were my neighbors. And one day after work, I got a job helping, adding to the school there. And I went over to see Chip one evening, and just after work, and it was a gorgeous night, just like magic, millions of stars. And he started telling me this story about an enlightened man. Now, I had been a searcher for ever since I was a young teenager, because I knew there was something there, even though that I lived more like a party animal by this time. So there was this two kinds of me. Anyway, I went over to Chip's place, and he came out and we sat under the stars, and he told me about this enlightened man on Salt Spring Island that he had just met. And there was something about that was so Carlos Castaneda kind of prickly. I don't know how to explain it. And as it turned out, Sid was giving his first big public talk on Salt Spring Island. And I went over there, and I had all this stuff, the ritual kind of stuff that I thought I should be doing, to being in a position to gather energy and all of that kind of thing. Well, when Sid started talking, it was game over. None of that stuff made any sense to me anymore. What I knew was I had a new feeling. And then after that, I literally felt like I was walking on air. And I met Jim Beck and Pam, and they invited me to come and stay. I had nowhere to stay. And that was my first beginning to that. And I met their son and helped him learn how to ride a bike, in fact, in the morning. And I knew then that I had to give up a lot of stuff that I thought was true. And I was very humble about it. And then the first thing I did was go to Vancouver and talk to Krista, who was a friend of mine. We had no kind of spiritual connection kind of like that, but I just wanted to share with her. And I think it seems to me like I talked for 2 days. Anyway, that was the beginning. And I never, ever stopped learning from Sid. And when we came back to the island, most everybody had left. We came back and we got to know him a lot more personally and help him. My kids worked on his house and things like that. And just an ordinary man, but an extraordinary man at the same time. Anyway, that's all I want to say. I'm grateful to be here.
Thank you, Bob, for that. When we, as a committee, start putting this together, I really didn't have an idea. I mean, we wanted to get everybody together to celebrate, but when I got on the call and started looking at all the boxes, it kind of hit me, because I'm familiar with quite a few people on the call, and I know the amazing impact you've had on the world. And it's like, oh, wow, that's what this did. Like and just the fact that 104 people are on the call, we know others are coming at different times due to time zones, and who they've impacted in the world all came from Sid's initial insight. And I think that is just one of the most beautiful things, to celebrate. And I see people are bringing their digital hands up, and we are going to call it. I saw one hand raised, though, as Bob began talking. So we're going to start there, and then we'll go down the line. So, but again, yeah, this is such a beautiful thing to witness what one message has been able, how one message of truth has been able to help, shape all of the lives of everybody on this call. And so we'll go, Jack, Uncle Jack will go, and then we'll start down the line with those hands that are up.
Okay, I don't know how this is going to come out. Excuse me. So I want to jump ahead to 1991. There was already a psychology of mind faculty, and I was just doing research for the book Modelo that I was writing because I had bumped into Roger Mills. And I won't go through the whole story because I wrote it up in my book, Seduced by Consciousness. But I found myself sitting around a table with all these psychology of mind faculty people eating dinner, and there was and there was Sid, who I was trying to get in contact with because I was trying to get to the source since I was writing this book. So he starts, at one point he said to me, I can see you're here looking for help. Ask me anything you want. And then he started talking to me, at me, while this whole group was around the table. And I felt so embarrassed. And after I kind of finished sliding under the table, somewhere along the way, all of a sudden, I became really disoriented. And I like totally disoriented, so much that I didn't know what life was anymore. And I mean, if you can imagine, I mean, I didn't know this until a few years later, but the way I see it now is Sid was basically saying to me, Jack, you've been looking out there for the answer, for your happiness, for your joy, for your kicks in life. And that is exactly the opposite direction. You've been looking the wrong way. Everything is in here, and you've been looking out there. And so, like, 45 years of my life, all of a sudden was called into question in terms of my approach to it. And that shook me up big time. So, I mean, I was so disoriented after that I remember Keith's wife, Valda, and Joe Bailey's wife, Michael, and Roger Mills's wife, Clytie, had to basically lead me around the streets of Vancouver because I was completely disoriented. I probably couldn't even dial the telephone at that point. And I remember getting on the bus to go to where these basically strangers, it was a friend of a friend who I was staying with. And when I got on the bus, I just felt like crying because I knew that my life would never be the same. I didn't know how it was going to be different. There was no way I could articulate anything about what had happened to me. But I just knew my life could no longer be the way that it was because I knew only one thing, and I knew that beyond a shadow of a doubt, and that is I knew that Sid knew that he was speaking truth. And that was completely unshakable to me. And I have to thank George Pransky for helping my intellect to catch up to what happened to me. Because otherwise I wouldn't have had a thing to say about it. And for years I couldn't even talk about that experience because I would get emotional about it. And I knew that it wasn't helpful to anybody. Like nobody knew what I was talking about anyway, and I couldn't articulate what I was talking about. So, you know, the other thing I want to say about this is that it's, you know, there are some people along the way have questioned, you know, how important Sid Banks is. Well, we're just 100 and some odd people on this call right now, but there are, I would probably say, hundreds of thousands of people around the world now who have been touched, and their lives have at least improved, if not changed altogether. And like every person who tells me that their life has changed as a result of either speaking with me or being affected by my books or something, it's got nothing to do with me. It's all about the fact that it came from Sid. Every one of those hundreds of thousands of people out there, it's all comes down to this one man. That's absolutely, it blows my mind. Absolutely blows my mind. I just want to say one more thing, and that is that other than Sid, I think the person most responsible for this stuff getting spread around the world like it has is Roger Mills. Because Roger Mills is the one who took the chance to take it into these communities that nobody thought could ever be helped. And by the fact that he ended up changing not just individual lives, but entire communities, that's what started it spreading around. The word was getting out like, whoa, this is unbelievable. Everybody thinks this is backwards to work from the inside out, and yet it's having all these effects on people's lives. And like, you know, people like Kathy Casey wouldn't have gone into the prisons if it wasn't for the fact that Roger Mills started this thing in Modelo. And it just blows my mind, the impact that everything that I've done can be traced to Roger, and Sid, and everything that Roger did can be traced to Sid. It's just astounding to me, and I'll never get over it. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, Jack. Thank you. That's so powerful. Yeah, that was so deep, man. I don't know if you want to let did Krista have her hand up? Did Krista want to answer? Come in? Her hand's gone back down again.
Hi. Hi. So I was thinking way back in 1975, end of summer of 1975, I thought I would never see my friend Bob Campsell again because he was into some trips that didn't interest me. There was a lot of seeking alternative lifestyles and so on in those days, as we know, and I just wasn't into that. So Bob was already living on Main Island, but hadn't, heard Sid yet. To my surprise, a few weeks later, he came to see me in Vancouver, where I was just heading back into university, and showed up at my door, which was a total surprise, and with the proclamation that he'd found the secret to life. And it was amazing, the feeling that came out. Bob had gone to see Sid on Salt Spring Island. And Bob, as he said, it was just changed his life. And he came and shared this powerful feeling with me with just a couple of facts that I argued with a bit, but you couldn't deny the feeling. It was a new feeling in the world, and it was so powerful, and changed my life right from then, right from that moment of having this feeling shared. So your question was about meeting Sid for the first time. So I was really, really fortunate in that Bob had shared with me, and I was ready. I was ready to meet Sid. By the time I went to the first talk a few months later, I was so open to hearing him and seeing him that it was, as everyone's saying, being in his presence when he was sharing the truth was life-changing, literally. And it was the mystery and the love and his humility and generosity and humor. But I recall Sid, like Jack was saying, you get disoriented because everything kind of explodes in a wonderful way. And Sid said to me, he could see I was kind of just stunned, speechless. And he said, "It's okay, dearie, just go home, just be ordinary, just live." And that was really his message to all of us again and again, that it's the oneness, and just go and live. There's nothing extra that you have to do, just live and share the love. And of course, from thinking I would never see Bob again, because he was going to do that trip, to now we're, I don't know, pushing 46 years of of marriage, and have grandchildren some of them are already grown, and got me back into teaching when I heard the truth, and just having relationships with family and friends that are based on the unconditional love and the mystery of the truth that Sid shared with us. Thank you.
Oh, Krista, that was so wonderful. I'm just so touched by the incredible power of just living. It's just, thank you so much. Well, Judy, you're next. You're muted.
The first time that I met Sid, excuse me, I knew who he was because I was in Bill Pettit's office, and at that time, just to give you a little description of me, so I'm not proud of it, but I was a very successful business person. I had started a business of my own that was extremely successful as a medical practice management business, which is how I met Bill, because he was a client in need of management of his practice. And I had already had this one incredible experience that changed me, in that I had spent my entire adult life not feeling sufficiently successful or good enough and trying to prove myself. Everything I did, I would like, oh, it's not good enough. I got to try harder. I got to do something else. I had a restless kind of need to succeed, and I didn't even know what success was. And I kept succeeding, and then, just being dissatisfied or being untouched by it, or found that it wasn't that helpful. And it was, I had a whole wall full of plaques and awards and newspaper clippings and framed clippings and pictures of me with famous people and all this stuff on my office wall. And I'd already had this one experience where after I met Bill, I was struck by the fact that he was a happy doctor with no money. And he had money, but it wasn't accessible to him because he didn't know how to collect it. And and yet he wasn't discouraged. He wasn't worried. He just figured, I'll find somebody that can figure this out and we'll take care of it and I don't have to worry about it. And he was so different from all the other doctors I knew that I was very struck by that. And then when he told me what he did, I was extremely struck by the idea that it was clear to me that he had no belief whatsoever in mental illness. He just didn't believe in it. And he saw everybody at their core as perfect and fine. And that was a new concept to me too. And I found it hard to believe. And I kept asking him, what do you do with people? And he kept saying, it's not about doing. And finally, he had invited me to sit in on some groups that he was doing for patients, families, and friends, because they would be frightened by the change in people that had been mentally ill for years, that they had been organizing their family around providing for or caring for these people. And suddenly the people burst free and were well. And it was shocking and frightening sometimes to family members who were sitting around waiting for the other shoe to drop. So Bill said, maybe you'd like to sit down and maybe get a little bit of an understanding of what I do, because I try to explain that to the people that come to this group. So I had gone to the group, and Bill, for some reason, introduced me as the new business person that was going to help him with his practice, and told the lab and said, you patients will be really happy because you won't keep getting calls from our office trying to figure out how to collect your bills. And, he was kind of kidding about it. And then he said, but she's having a hard time understanding what it is that my practice is all about. And so if any of my patients who are here would like to talk to her, just line up after group and she'll stay a while and you can tell her your story. And I'm told this story a lot. I'm not going to go into the details, but what the common thread in all the stories was, well, he didn't really do anything. People would say, I couldn't say what, that there's some technique or something in it, but, he was really nice. And he talked to us just like a regular person, like you wouldn't know that we were the patient. He was just chatting with us and talking to us about life. And I kept thinking, like, oh, then how are you treating their illness? And the first patient that I talked to had been agoraphobic for 25 years and gotten over it. Now she hadn't left her house for 25 years. And now she's in a group in a building far from her house where her daughter had to drive her there, talking to a total stranger and completely relaxed. So she clearly was not agoraphobic anymore. And she said, well, he's the first doctor in all these years. She was in the psych ward in the hospital when he met her. He was on call. He was the first doctor in all these years that just came in and sat down and started talking to me like I was a normal person. And I started thinking, well, I understand. Well, I know what he's talking. I can talk to him. And she kind of woke up that she could be a normal person. And then Second Chance had just come out and he left a copy of it for her and said, I know it's boring in the hospital and you're going to be here a couple of days. And so I brought a book that I thought you might like to read, and they just left it there. And, she acknowledged that it was indeed boring in the hospital, and she started reading the book. And she said, it was a pretty good story. It was kind of short. It was easy to read. And she said, I was kind of halfway into the book and I suddenly had this thought. She said, I had this thought. I've been scaring myself to death with my own thinking my whole life. I don't have to do that. I could just stop doing that. And she said, I stopped. I changed. It was amazing. It was life-shattering. And she said it had nothing to do with him because he never told me that. And the whole screen just disappeared. Are you all still there? Okay, now it's back. And so I suddenly, I don't know, something happened to me. I went and told Bill about it. And I was expecting him to react like a normal doctor and get really pissed off and, like, they don't appreciate me and I work so hard and all, but he didn't. He was thrilled. And he said, that's wonderful. That's just what, that's what I've been trying to tell you. People have innate health. So then I got really interested in getting to the bottom of this. And the first thing that happened to me the next morning, when I went to my office, I took all the plaques and the awards and the pictures and all the framed crap about what a wonderful person I didn't think I was yet off my wall, boxed them up and closed the box and threw it away after a while, and hung 2 beautiful watercolors in my office. And I just did that. I just was moved to think I don't need all this crap on my wall. So it wasn't too many. It was about a week later that Sid was visiting. He used to go around and visit people that, you know, were trying to put his work out in the world. And so he was in Florida and he was visiting Bill. And so Bill said, you know, the person who wrote that book I gave to the patient that I also gave you a copy of is going to be in my office for a little while this afternoon. And he's going to talk to my staff. If you'd like to come, you're welcome. And so I thought, oh my gosh, you know, that I haven't read the book yet because I hadn't. And I didn't have time to read it. Before I went to the office, I remember looking at the front cover and the back cover and kind of flipping through it. And I thought, oh gosh, you know, I just got to go and see what this is. So I knew he was Sydney Banks. I knew Bill's story of his encounter with Sid. I knew a little bit about him, and I knew that he had started all of this, but I didn't know anything more. And I sat way in the back of the room because I got there just at the last minute. And there were maybe 15 people there, but it's just a group room. It wasn't that big of a room. And of course, those of you who've heard Sid's tapes and everything know he has a Scottish brogue, and it's a little hard to understand sometimes, especially because he would speak very quietly, especially when he was, you know, close to people, and he didn't yell at people or raise his voice, or, you know, he spoke in a very lovely tone. And so I really couldn't pick up everything he was saying. But I was sitting there, and the first thing that happened to me was I felt quiet. And I have to tell you that I hadn't felt quiet since I was a child. There was always something on my mind. I was always 15 steps ahead of myself. I was always analyzing why I didn't do this instead of that. I had trouble making decisions because I was so caught up in my thinking. I had to analyze everything to death, and I never could come to a conclusion. And it was, you know, I was exhausted, and my doctor told me, if you don't do something about the stress you're living under, you're going to die young. So as I speak to you now, I'm 80. So obviously I did something about it, but, and I was sitting there and I suddenly felt quiet. And I'm just listening to this voice, and it was really like listening to music, to be honest with you. I wasn't following the words that much, but it was really like being in a lovely symphony or something, just listening to music. And I just started taking a deep breath, and I thought, wow, this is a different feeling. And when it was over, you know, Sid shook my hand, and Bill introduced me to him, and then he and Bill and some of the people closest to him were going out to dinner, and I left. And when I got in my car and to go back to my office, it was the end of the day, but not quite the end of the day. When I got in my car to go back to the office, I just felt this overwhelming love for the people who worked for me. And I realized how difficult our business was, because some of our clients they all treated me well because they were afraid of me, but they treated my staff really badly. And I told myself I justified it in that, you know, I took care of them. I paid them well. I got them health insurance. I cared for them. And, you know, that was just the cost of doing business, that you had to do business with obnoxious people. And one of them was particularly obnoxious. And I'm driving through the medical complex parking lot, and without even knowing what I was doing, I pulled into the parking space for the medical office building. And I found myself going up to this guy's office, the guy that was very mean and nasty to clients, but he represented a lot of money to us because he was mean and nasty to everybody. He was always in trouble. He always needed help, and he was a very lucrative client. And I walked into his office and fired him as a client. I just walked in without any consideration of anything else, I just said, you know, I'm going to put an end to our contract. We each have the opportunity to have 3-week notice, and I'm giving you my 3-week notice. And he got up. I heard words, curse words that I hadn't heard since my husband was in the Air Force. You know, he was screaming at me. He was so angry, and he's, you know, I trusted you. You were, you got my whole business in your control, and you're going to tell me you're going to break this contract. And I said, no, we'll train your staff. Don't worry about it. You know, I'll be there. Your staff can call with questions. I'll help you. It'll be fine. And he said, you can't do this. I'm going to sue you. I'm going to ruin you. And he's screaming at me and curse words, and he called me all kinds of things I won't repeat. And I just said, well, my lawyer will be in touch with your lawyer. And I left the office, and I felt like I was on air. I was sorry for him that he was so upset, but I knew it would be fine. And I just left, and I went back and I told my staff, and they panicked because he was such a lucrative part. And they said, are you going to have to fire some of us, or what are we going to do? And I said, I don't know, but I'm sure it's going to be fine. I just feel like I said, honestly, it was starting to be painful to me the way he treated you. And they were like, you know, I know, but he meant so much to the business. And I'm going like that, you know, the reason you go into business for yourself is you don't have to do business with jerks. And the funniest thing happened. The word got out in the medical community that I had fired him as a client, because he, of course, did exactly what he said he was going to do. He went and screamed at everybody about what a jerk I was. And I had the gall to fire him. And so all of a sudden, my business just went amazingly well, because there were people who honestly had questioned my judgment, because he was one of my clients. I didn't know this, but they thought, if she's doing business with him, I don't know, you know, because he was a kind of squirrely person. And so I didn't even put 2 and 2 together in my own mind, but I felt great. And I felt really like my husband was furious with me, because as a business person and a banker, he thought it was a mistake. And I knew I had done the right thing, and I was fine with it. And I was so calm. For the first time in my life, I was really calm. And I had a meeting with Bill a few days later, and I told him that I'd fired this client. And I told him the aftermath. And he smiled and he said, well, I'm really glad you came to Sid's talk. And that was the first moment that I kind of put 2 and 2 together and realized, yeah, me too. Because I had realized, I just part of the continuum, I realized that I didn't have to do anything that didn't make sense, because I was a business person and practical. That if you operate from a grounding in truth, that what you do just works out, even if it seems a little weird. And when I told that story to Sid the next time I saw him, which wasn't too much later because he was in Florida for a while, he just smiled and he said, well, I'm glad you set yourself free, dearie. So that's the first time I had an encounter with Sid.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you so much. Dickin, you're up next, sir. You're muted, sir.
This has been very heartwarming. Just lovely. Remembering first time I shook Sid's hand, what I was most struck with was his eyes. I had held my kids as babies and spent hours gazing into their eyes, and there was just this amazing presence. And I knew when I shook his hand and looked in his eyes that he knew something I wanted to know. But it was hard for me. I'd been a psychologist 10 years, and I was very interested in thought content, feeling content, behavior. That was the whole field of psychology for hundreds of years, examining content. And so when the very first time I heard Sid talk, I was in my thinking, examining what he was saying, trying to make sense of it. But fortunately, I had also spent a lot of time meditating, and I didn't meditate the way I listened. Meditation for me was letting go. So I heard Sid was going to be talking for a weekend in California, and I flew across the United States. That was the first time I had the chance to listen to him talk for 2 days rather than for just an hour. It's so hard to describe what happened when I stopped listening by thinking and just completely let go of everything I knew and thought I knew, not trying to think about anything. The space that I dropped into is indescribable. People have used words floating, in love, alive. It was just making sense of it. I had felt, even though I was a psychologist for 10 years, I would have thought that I was an insecure person working very hard to have experiences of well-being. So I could experience great love with my wife, with my kids. I could have moments in meditation that were blissful, but I was an insecure person having those experiences. When I had this experience with Sid, my whole world turned upside down. And it turned out I am this space of love and beauty. And sometimes I have insecure thoughts. Everything changed. Everything changed. I laughed, I cried. I'm going, why doesn't everybody know this? And I was working in a private practice with a group of people that were my closest friends. I had worked with them for 13 years. I thought I would never, ever leave this group. And I knew in an instant when I had this experience, as Jim was saying, you don't share because someone tells you to share. You share because you've discovered something that is so beautiful, you want everybody in the world to know it. And I came home, flew home. I walked in the door. My wife, Coisy, walked up to me and she goes, Dicken, when are you going to open your center to teach these principles? And I knew on the plane that I would do that. And I went into my friends on Monday and I said, I'm giving a 2 weeks notice. I have to start a center that will share this beautiful message. And 2 weeks later, opened the doors of the Vermont Center for Human Understanding, dedicated to sharing Sid's message as best as I could. And pretty soon people from all over the United States are calling me up and wanting to come learn about this. I don't know how that happened, but it just word of mouth. Word of mouth. One client would leave and send me 3 more clients. And before you knew it, I had more work than I knew what to do with. But I can tell you, I would not have stayed interested in continuing to explore this space within all these years if it didn't awaken deeper and deeper love. And to watch that happen with my clients, to watch them wake up to a love that's not dependent upon or conditioned by anything in the world. It's the most amazing thing I have ever come across and found is a direction to point people where they can wake up to their true nature. So it's an honor and a delight to be here with all of you, and many of you here have been teachers for me as well. So, thank you.
Thank you for that, Dickens. That brought the feeling straight into my chest, man. Thank you. So heartfelt. Yes, Mr. Shane, you've had your hand up. You can come in next.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, Dickon. And thank you, everyone that we're hearing from here, and all these faces that I haven't seen for so many years. And I'm so in love with you all and so grateful to so many of you friends for, I just thinking about how I came to the island and how I met Sid and how you were all so kind to me and sweet to me. And so many people here were my teachers because I had no idea what was going on when I came to the island. I was a very happy boy. I was just a teenager, and someone sent me a letter and said, I met this man and here's what he had to say. And so I couldn't stop thinking, what if he actually knew what he was talking about? What if this was actually true for him? Like if he didn't just say it, but he knew it. And I couldn't sleep that night. It just dumbfounded me to imagine it was coming from a person, an enlightened person. So the next day or the day after, I got on a plane and I flew up to the coast, not even knowing where to go. I got quite confused and ended up going up island to Crofton and catching that little ferry over to Vesuvius and completely befuddled. Like, what am I doing? I'm not looking for a guru or searching, but what if this is true? What if he knows this? And I was talking to this woman at the front of the ferry, this little ferry, and telling her how crazy this all was. And she said, that is very strange because that guy you're talking about is my husband. And she got me in the car and took me to their house. And that's where I met Sid. And I was just a kid, as you know, but so I gave Sid a couple of trick questions to test to see if he knew what he was talking about. And my first one, because I had this belief about what could making dreams come true. And he just held me on my arms and said, your dreams are always coming true. You're living in a divine dream suspended between time and space and matter. And I've never understood anything since then. My mind went blank. I didn't know what to think. For years, I listened to him and I never really could say that I understood. I just knew that what he was saying was true. This was truth. You know, in those early days, we used to call it like love and understanding. And what I saw with Sid and Barb was just love. Just that feeling of love that I wanted. I wanted to live my life in that feeling. And that was mostly what we all felt. I'm looking at so many of you that were also just nurturing it in each other, the way we were together, the kind of love that we grew up in it, that sort of magical feeling that we went out into the world and did such beautiful things with. It all came from that one simple feeling, that feeling of love. And so much of it wasn't even in the words that we heard. There were so many quiet times, I think, hearing from all of you, the way we would sit in Sid's living room down by the water and the fire going and that grandfather clock going slower and slower and things getting quieter. And there'd be silences or laughter and all the humor that came out of Sid that kind of raised us up. Like we were like children being woken up by him. And somehow, even if I never did understand any information about how that came from, I knew it woke up in me. And I seeing all of you, again, I want to thank you for the way you nurtured me in those early years, helped me. And to remember Sid, about how kind and sweet he was, and loving. And, you know, you felt like you were wrapped up like you're just a little kid being looked after by somebody who actually knew what they were talking about. And I think of, some of the times, the quietness that would come in our lives there when we were with him, and how that also was true when we went traveling together, not just in Ganges. I remember one time there this happening, but also 3 times, like when we were in Tuscany together and also in Glasgow, where Sid started speaking. And we were, in these cases, in restaurants, and the entire restaurant went quiet. It was just silence everywhere. And the waiters stopped serving, and even people that you think couldn't hear him went absolutely silent. It was like there was a presence with us there. And people would get touched by that, even if he wasn't necessarily speaking, just by the way he was with people, that you could feel this essence of love coming from him. That and his humor too, which so many of us have all these stories of the laughter that we used to have, giggling away. I remember being with Christine Heath with him down in Coral Gables. Actually, we went to that little flea market with him, and he had a rental car that was a convertible. And when you opened the door, it said, "The door is ajar." And he said, "No, it's not. It's a door. It's not a jar. A jar is a jar." And he kept opening the door and closing it and having this conversation with the car that had us in giggles forever. It was that he was in this feeling of love and laughter. And that's all I've known. I wanted to get as close to that feeling for my whole life, to live as happily, and to see it in him inspired it in me to find as much happiness and as much love, and just simply live as much love as I could. I'm so grateful to have that from him, and so grateful to so many of you that I see here about all the kindness and love you've given me all these years. Even when I was such a foolish little kid, when I first arrived on the island, you all took me under your wing and were so kind to me. So thank you, everybody.
Oh, Shane, just listening to you talk, the joy just bubbles over. It's such a gift, and I'm so glad that you're here to share that feeling with us. Mark, your turn.
Well, thank you. Thank you to the committee for bringing this about. This has been beautiful. Looking at all of you, I'm really humbled to be here. Really, all of the just beautiful people that I've met through my journey, and how much you have shared that have made a difference. One of the things that first heard Sid in 1983. But one of the things through those first couple of years, as he was giving seminars, is I was really blessed to meet all of the people that were there in the early days. And I just loved that, because I was so interested in those days. But every time I met you all, there was always just love, understanding, and acceptance, because I'm thinking, who am I? These people have known Sid since 74, 75, and yet you all gave me just this beautiful feeling of acceptance and encouragement to continue, because here I am. I was a psychologist, and you just kept encouraging me to do that work. So for me, the first time I met Sid, you have to see, I was a traditionally trained psychologist in Freudian therapy and behavioral therapy, and that's what I was doing at a medical center in a psychiatric clinic. But I wasn't happy. I mean, I was having a nice life, but I really, truly wasn't what you would call deeply happy. I was troubled at times. And so I called up a supervisor of mine who helped me through, the training that I was in my hospital work. And he said, there's a person I sent, we've been up to Salt Spring and visited this person. This was John Enright, George Pransky's partner at that time. He said, there's a man here he's giving a gathering. You should go. His name's Sydney Banks. So I trusted that and went. And it was a talk that he was giving. And I was sitting there, and all of a sudden, I was just filled with beautiful feelings. Really just truly loving feelings. And I had an insight. I really saw that all that I had been learning about feelings and honoring feelings and getting people to express their feelings, like at that time, hitting pillows with a pillow, and getting your anger out was ridiculous. It was nothing. It wasn't it. They're made up. That's what I saw. Those feelings are made up. And that was it. But I just was in these beautiful feelings. And then I knew I can be happy if I understood what this gentleman was saying. If I understood that, I knew I would be happy, and so would my clients. So the night ended. I did go and just kind of shake his hand, and I could the feeling every time I was with him, when I was ever blessed to have been with him, was just this total love. Honestly, this total love. So I go home. I don't think anything has changed. And I go to my office the next day to see 5 hours of clients, one-to-one therapy. I get into my office and I realized I can't do what I was doing. I couldn't do anything that I was doing. It didn't make sense anymore. It didn't make any more sense. It didn't make sense to me. So I sit down and I tell my first client, you know how we've been working together? I can't do that anymore. But I have something I saw last night, and we can talk about it. But if you don't like that, I'll refer you to somebody else in the clinic. I had one sentence. Here I had this body of psychological theories and approaches that were no longer relevant. But I have one sentence. And but I knew the one sentence was true. I knew it was a truth. It wasn't about me. It was a truth about how we operate, our psychological truth. And that was it. That started my whole journey into all that has come my way, and learning Sid's teachings deeper and deeper, and meeting almost all of you that are here on the call today. And none of my clients left. I said my one sentence, and then it just kind of grew from there. We just had a conversation. The funny thing though, with my first client, I said, I have this one sentence. It's like, all that, all those feelings we've been working on, they're not real, they're made up. And so they said, so she said to me, okay, what else you got? I said, well, all those feelings you have, they're made up. Yeah, that's all I had. But it's imagining from one grain of truth. I mean, it just continued to evolve. This understanding just continued to evolve. So that's when I first met Sid. It's been beautiful. It's a beautiful journey to meet all of you, and all of the work that happened in the San Francisco Bay Area as a result. Not just of me, but all of the people there, and Sid coming to the San Francisco Bay Area many times to share. And how many programs we developed in this county where the community was helped. For me, one more thing, I was in a psychiatric clinic with 30 other psychiatrists, psychologists, psychiatric nurses, and I fell in love with them. I was so judgmental of them prior to this evening with Sid, and I just fell in love with them. That had them interested in what I was learning. As a result of that, 2 psychologists started to learn this understanding and develop programs for within the clinic based on Sid's teachings. One of the head psychiatrists of the clinic started to come with me to a seminar with Sid or other teaching that were around. So again, it wasn't me, it was the feeling. And when they caught the feeling, they wanted more. So I was just, I'm just so thankful to myself for not doubting my supervisor and following his guidance to go listen to this man I never heard of, because it changed my life. So thank you.
Mark, thank you so much for that, because that's a perfect segue to opening up, adding another question to the mix so we can, hear from more voices, because that was initially about just honoring the beginning and those who were there to initially meet Sid and talk to him. And open up the question now in conjunction with that. Another question that, may allow others to speak into the room is just about what this love, understanding, and message has led you to do. And so with the next person who has their hand up, I think it's perfect, because knowing her personally and what she's been able to do as a result of this understanding, and some places where have been deemed joy, peace, happiness, love, and understanding can't be, she was a vessel to able to have that impact there in those places. And so, along with when did you initially meet Sid, the other question on the table as well is, what is the message of what Sid has shared with the world led you to do, led you to inspired, or led you to do with sharing it? And next up, we have Kathy Casey. Beauty, Kathy.
Thanks, Rob. I want you to know Mark Howard was the first person I heard the principles from. And I was not looking for anything. I was listening at the seminar to impress this woman to get a job from her. I was looking for a paid internship. She invited me to come. She said, well, it's 4 days. And I thought in my mind, who has 4 days for anything? I was in school. I was doing an internship. I was a wife. I was a mother, and a little hyper. Right, Mark? I think I was one of his first challenges in terms of mentoring teachers. I was a very live wire. But in any event, by 12 o'clock that day, Mark was on a stage with Joe Bailey, and they kept talking about having a nice feeling, clearing one's mind. It's all thought. It's all being created via, I'm just listening to this guy with one eye on the clock to see if I could slip out, because there are 85 people in the room. And I thought, well, I can say hi to Annette because she's the one I wanted to impress. And I can just slip out because, she wouldn't see me after a while. And so I had one foot out the door. And I'm so grateful that something caught my ear as they were sharing to a group of folks who pretty much were not really interested, right, Mark? Remember that whole group of folks? Department of Alcohol and Drug Services, a lot of clinical trained, people clinically trained with a lot of different approaches. I'm just sitting there trying to impress somebody to get a paid internship. That was it for me. Well, of course, by noon, it was like, people talk about, you see your life flash before your eyes. Well, that's what happened to me. It explained my whole life. All of a sudden I realized, oh, that's what happened. That's why this happened in my life. That's why this, it's like my whole life flashed before me, but in a way where I understood. No wonder. So that was that. So once I heard the principles, I got it into the jail system. My colleague and I, we wrote up a proposal. We got funded for it. We go into this jail system, we are teaching the principals close to 9 months. I'm out there teaching. And, you know, hundreds of inmates are learning the principles. I had never heard of Sydney Banks. Nobody ever said his name. I didn't know who he was. And we looked at each other like when we first, George Princey said, oh, by the way, Sydney Banks will be speaking in Hawaii. I was at a seminar George was doing. And Faye and I looked at each other, who is that? And we're like, we got worried. And somebody said, well, he's just this person. And I thought, oh, they have this weird guru. I'm thinking, oh, here we go. There's some weird guy that we didn't even know about. We've put money on, the government money is being spent on this, and it's coming from some who knows what. And we were freaking out. So I looked to Faye, I said, we need to go check this guy out. I mean, our reputations are at stake here. And, you know, money has been spent. I mean, this is truly why I flew to Hawaii to listen to Sydney Banks speak, to find, and I kept asking Roger Mills, Jack, I'm so glad you mentioned Roger Mills. He also was my main teacher. So between Mark and Roger, I was learning so much, and we were doing so much in the community. So we fly out, and it's at this hotel in you know, on Oahu. And so I show up with Faye, and we're sitting there, and all these people are there, and everybody's calm and quiet. And I thought, oh, here we go. Because I'd gone through all the New Age stuff. You know, I'd been through the ring. One day I woke up, I said, I'm done. I'm done seeking. I'm done working on myself. This is as good as it gets. So I'm sitting there thinking, who is this guy? I hope it's not going to be bad. I hope it's not going to be bad. So he comes out, and they have a special chair for him. And the Hawaiian lady comes out, and she does her Hawaiian whatever, puts the lei over his neck. And I'm sitting there like, oh, we are in big trouble. Because I had been around so many of these approaches and movements, or whatever you want to call them. So to make a long story short, so he opens it up. He says, listen, would somebody ask me a question? So this woman raises her hand, and she goes into this long thing about how she has a friend who has this physical issue, and this is, you know, she had to do this, and she's not sure about it. I mean, she just went on and on about this friend of hers. And then she says to Sid, so what would you tell her to do? What would you think she should do? So I'm sitting there thinking, okay, here comes the woo-woo stuff. Here it comes. And he took a while to answer. You could hear a pin drop. And I'm waiting for the answer. And all of a sudden he looks up and he goes, well, I think she should go see a doctor. And as soon as I heard that, I'm like, oh, okay, that's good. Okay, that's good. And then, of course, he starts, you know, speaking. And as he's speaking, this is my thinking, well, yeah, we teach that. Well, yeah, we've been teaching that. Okay, this seems to be in line with what we have been doing. I mean, it was really funny because I didn't know who he was. So I was so relieved. I thought, okay, we're all on the same page here. So he has a break. He gives us a break. And it was one of those lecture style halls, you know, where you're kind of, you know, it's kind of a graduated thing. Anyway, people go rushing up to him and they surround him, as always happens. And I'm standing there kind of in the middle of where all the seating is, and everybody's down there. And I'm just standing there like kind of taking it in, like, wow, what just happened here? And all of a sudden he breaks through this group of people. He cuts through and he starts walking up the aisle. And I'm thinking, oh shoot, he thinks there's a door back there. He doesn't know the door is down. You know, he's trying to get out of there. Well, no, he's walking towards me. He comes walking towards me, and I look behind me, and I'm the only one there. He comes right up to me. He said, I want you to come to Dunsmuir. And I looked at him, and I'm like, okay. And he turns around and leaves. And I'm like, what was that? So he comes back, you know, he speaks until lunch. And again, people surround him. And again, he cuts through all these people. He comes up to me, he says, I want you to come to Dunsmuir. I'm like, oh, okay. So of course I go running to find Roger Mills. Roger, what's this Dunsmuir thing? And he said, well, what do you mean? Well, Sid said he wants me to come to Dunsmuir. He said, oh, we're having a special program. We're bringing in the banking businesses and I'm bringing my community people in. And so obviously he wants you to come too. And I said, why? He said, oh, I told him about your work in the jail. It was his dream to get this into the jail. Now, you need to understand, I had no knowing of him. I just got hit with these principles. To make a long story short, we were able to eventually invite him into the jail. We had 165 inmates. We had the commander of the jail, many uniforms, all under one roof, men and women inmates, for him to speak. And he walked into this, we had this auditorium in the jail. They have an auditorium in the jail. He walked in and he looked around and he started walking to the back of the room and he started walking out the back door. And I had to chase him because I said, Sid, you can't go out there. You can't just wander around the jail. And he turned around and he had tears just streaming down his face. He said, all these people are learning the principles? I said, well, yeah, and we have way more, but they wouldn't let them out. So, and the fact that they allowed men and women under the same roof, that's why they had a lot of uniforms there. It was a big deal. And I can't even tell you how that happened. A politician was there. She introduced Sid. She said, Sydney Banks is healing my community because we had taken it into her area. And she was a politician that represents, you are healing my community. And she gave this amazing introduction of Sydney Banks. And when you speak of the feeling, like, again, Derek, when you talk about, imagine in a jail having an aloha feeling. And we're talking uniforms here. There was a buzz in the room. When he finished speaking, a couple of the uniformed men and women, female correctional officers, came up to me and thanked me. Thank you for bringing him here. Some of them had tears in their eyes. They were hit. They didn't know what hit them. The commander of the jail, he was just there because the politician was there and he had to show up, because, he had to show up. He was taken aback. It was the most amazing experience I've ever seen. So when he finished speaking, a number of the inmates came up to me and they said, can we spend more time with him? And I said, well, it's up to the officers. I have no say over that. And they allowed the special group to stay. It was called RCP. So this is like a kind of a boot camp in a jail system. So they surrounded him and they all have orange jumpsuits on. They gave him a special hat that said RCP, and they sat at his feet and asked him very human questions. Sid, do you ever get angry? Did you use drugs? Did you drink? I mean, they just asked him all these beautiful human questions. And he go, yeah, man. Oh yeah, I'd get mad. Oh yeah. Well, what do you do, Sid? Well, what's different is it comes and it goes. And I know what it is. I know what it is. And they just asked him all these questions. And I'm telling you, I will never, and of course, I had set up all this video equipment to tape the session, got the inmates to sign off on it. You have to get waivers. It was a big deal to get cameras in there. So I went up to Sid, I said, so Sid, we're going to film the event. And he said, no filming. No, I don't want to invade their part. This is for them. When we were finished with the whole event, as we're walking out, he turns to me and said, why didn't we film this? And I said, I was getting ready to say, but Sid, remember, and I thought, no. And somebody told me, you never ask. You just do it. You just do it. Oh, what do I know, right? But the point I'm saying is there were 165 inmates in there, but over time, and also Mark Howard had a lot to do with this, and Roger Mills had a lot to do with this. Thousands of inmates, thousands of community people, thousands of people in drug treatment programs. We were teaching the principles for 15 solid years, and it was free. It was free. It was offered to the community. anybody could show up and learn these principles. It was unbelievable. And my other dear friend and colleague, Linda Ramus, I don't know if she's on the call, she was also, I call it the brains behind the whole operation. She dealt with all the bureaucracy and all of that stuff. But she loved her job because we would all call in and share a story, you know, like, you're not going to believe this story. And she would say, yeah, just another miracle, right? I will never, ever forget those years. And that was just a small percentage of the work that I did in the world, but that will stay with me forever. And I'm so grateful to Mark Howard. I'm so grateful to Roger Mills, because they were the first two people that I learned these from. I didn't even know who Sid was. So there's hope. There's hope that even in our flaws, in our shortcomings, the message can still come through, because it really has nothing to do with us. That I learned. It has nothing to do with us, because this truth resides in every human being, and people recognize it and it resonates. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for whoever put this together. Judy Banks is here. She's somewhere in the squares. In fact, she's in San Jose, so we get to have lunch together. Again, I bow to Judy Banks because, you know, she, you know, the woman behind the man, right? And I love seeing Krista. All you folks I haven't seen in years. And I remember we put this huge conference on in San Jose, huge conference, and Sid spoke at that conference. So we had 500 people at a conference in San Jose, California, and Krista and her husband, they stayed at my place because I got to stay at the hotel. Yeah. So thank you all for coming. And for all you new folks, this was Sid's dream, that this should get out into the world. And this, now the whole world knows these principles. It's out there. And so for all of you, you know, whether you met Sid or not, the truth is the truth. And he even said, it's not me, it's in you. And so you can take that to the bank. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Kathy. That's so moving. Beautiful. Judith, you want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to add since you asked that second question, I wanted to add a brief postscript to the story I told, because I mean, that was just the very beginning, but the client that I fired, you know, we very peacefully got through the dissolution because the lawyers handled it and so on. And a year later, I was sitting at home and I got a phone call from him. And I was very surprised because I hadn't spoken to him at all since that day. And he said, Judy, please don't hang up. I know you probably don't want to talk to me and you don't want to hear from me, but please don't hang up. And I said, okay, well, I won't hang up. And he said, you remember how upset I was that day when you came to my office? And I said, oh yeah, it's kind of unforgettable. And he said, well, I thought you knew. And I said, knew what? And he said, I thought you knew that I was a cocaine addict and you were going to tell people. And so I was determined to ruin you before you could ruin me, but you never told anybody. And I said, well, the truth is I didn't know. And I just knew that something was off, you know, that you were very mean to people and very defensive and very difficult to work with. And it was very hard on my staff, and I was protecting my staff. And he said, well, you did the right thing, because he said, it really plagued me thinking, how could she be so considerate of me when I was so nasty to everybody? And I wasn't being that considerate. I honestly did not know he had a cocaine problem. So I said, well, why are you calling now? And he said, I'm closing my practice and I'm getting help. I'm going to a center and I'm going to get clean. And I'm not going to practice medicine anymore because it isn't right for me to do so. And I just wanted you to know that I thank you. And so that is kind of the power of the feeling without even knowing it. I mean, we don't know the effect that some of this has on people. But the second little postscript is that in terms of what we did, you know, my business changed completely, and I just fell in love with my clients, and everything changed about it. And that's a whole other story, and it was wonderful, but I just felt like this work was too important for me to be doing medical practice management, even though I was trying to share with my clients too. So I sold everything I had and sold my house when my daughter went to college, and sold pretty much everything I owned and sold my business and moved to La Conner, where George and Linda very graciously allowed me to come in and become a student again, and confront how messed up a lot of my thinking was for years. And I'm very grateful and feel very blessed by that I had. And of course, then we had a lot of contact with Sid. And, you know, Sid never, he never pointed out your flaws. He pointed out what you were missing. I was thinking that as I was listening to people talk, you know, it's like, it was the opposite of life. Usually, you know, you confront a person, you tell them what's wrong with them, and you know, which is kind of what I did with that client. And I realized, you know, there's a nicer way to handle everything in life, because Sid, I felt bad if I screwed up, but I didn't feel bad about myself. It wasn't personal. And the one thing that I've learned over all these years from really quieting down and looking deeper and knowing that there's an infinite amount for us to learn is that it's never personal. It's not about us. And that when we share from that feeling, from that universal, beautiful feeling, that's what connects us all together, because people don't have to even like you to catch the feeling. You know, it's not a personal thing at all. So anyway, that I just wanted to share that as kind of the postscript. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that and coming back on, Judy. That was really, really powerful. And you know, we have just about an hour left, and I'm so struck by the impact that so many people on this call have had, both from, and Kathy, you really highlighted this, like both from knowing Sid and from not knowing Sid, right? And just the incredible power of being touched by the principles. So we'd like to continue in this last hour and hear about, I don't know, the paths that you've all been on in terms of impacting the world, in terms of taking this into the world, maybe some of the challenges that you've faced, and then take that to hearing about what you'd like to see in the future. Where would you like to see this understanding going? So Rita, you're up next. You can say whatever you want, by the way. You don't have to answer my specific questions. and you are muted.
That's a big one. It's really nice to be here. Just still kind of waking up. And so great to see so many people that I have known either up close personal or from a distance. And I guess for me, I do want to say that this for me, I just am eternally grateful that in my lifetime, a common working man had an enlightenment experience. I mean, who would have thought, right? And that he saw, that everyone can live a happy and harmonious life, no matter what, right? And that I got to hear him, that I could hear him. And, for me, I just, I always saw the good in people, I always did. And whatever the reason. And I've always been a more reserved or quiet in some ways, not so much in other ways, but I observed a lot, right? And I always, the good in people. I didn't understand why they were being not that way. And I wanted to help people. I was always drawn to helping. That was just, I helped animals. I helped whatever I felt needed nurturing in some way. And so I did decided to get my doctorate, and I worked in Eugene, Oregon, and actually worked with Roger Mills, right? So Roger and I were colleagues and worked on different things, and we were good friends. We hung out a lot, and it was Roger who met Sid and told me about he was going to go and spend time with Sid, and I had no idea who Sid was, right? But I did know I had come at that point. I'd done a lot of different things, worked in the community, and I just I thought, okay, well, let me see if maybe I can get a doctorate. I didn't want to do the research. I didn't want to do the writing, but let me see about getting a doctorate. And but I wasn't quite sure about it, right? But I had come to a place in myself after lots of looking into different approaches and applying them, whatever, that there was a missing link. I just, I kind of just, that's how it looked to me, that psychology just didn't, they were missing something, not purposely, but they were missing it. And so I just was on my own little search, right, to find the missing link. And so Roger told me, anyway, I won't go into all the details. I do get lost in the details, pardon me. But I heard Sid speak on the tape, right, called The Missing Link. And I just realized this, I heard the truth. I had absolutely no doubt. This is it. I had no idea what it was, but that Sid had found the missing link. And and so I never turned my back. I have never in 45 years or whatever turned my back, because to me it always was about love, loving people. It seemed to come easy to love people, to me, right? And yet I, in my own kind of, I quietly would love people, right? The best I could. And, listening to Sid, and what I loved about it, I was always based on a lot of common sense, right? So it just kept ringing true. And I ended up, telling I did get into the doctorate program. And I told my advisor, who actually was a friend, thank God, because I said, I have to do my dissertation on this thing that I have heard. Right? And he said, well, what is that? And I said, well, and I would try to talk to him about what it was that I was hearing, because nothing had been written. There was nothing, you know, and that's, as a doctoral student, you're supposed to do new research, but it has to have something that you could go back to and say someone else talked about it. So we would spend actually hours in his office with me trying to tell him what the best I could, what I was hearing, right? And he would keep saying, well, no, well, you know, you could do quick research over here on this and this and this. And I'm kind of stubborn, you know, sometimes not in my best favor, but still. And I said, no, I can't. I can't. I know this is what I have to do my dissertation on. And he, you know, he just, he was very patient, right? And thank God for Chris and Joe and Keith, who started a program up in Minnesota, that they were doing some research. They were gathering some data on people. And I was able to eventually put together a retrospective study of people who had gone to that clinic and how it helped them with depression and anxiety, right? Very early on. And I thank God again that all these people were there to support and help. Because I just, you know, kind of like bumbling my way through. And so it, you know, it's, for me, it's one of the things I always loved and appreciated about Sid was how clear he was. This is about living, just living, being ordinary, being yourself, right? And I tend to like a quiet life, so that struck a chord for me for sure. And I love, like, I just spent 2 hours or 3 hours last night dancing my head off. I love dancing. I love music. So, you know, you get to be all these different things, right? Depending, right? And so, yeah, I can only, I see it going out. And now here, you know, Chris and I are now, you know, you follow a feeling. I felt something was needed. Well, something was asked for in Molokai, one of the islands here. Okay. Fast forward. Right. And I felt so drawn, you know, there's so many people on this island. They're so isolated, and so much has gone on since COVID. And there's just all this, you know, suffering, so much suffering going on. Right. And I just, my heart just like, they need help, right? And there's a center, the Molokai Community Health Center, that was asking for help, right? And I thought, well, let me check in. What is they need, right? And I just couldn't, you know, you get a feeling, you get drawn, right? I couldn't not walk away and say, well, you have to write a proposal. I said, well, I don't want to write a proposal. You know, I don't want to write a proposal, right? And the more I heard about it, the more information I got, I realized this was about going to be a bigger project than for me, right? And you know, Chris and I, we've done some wonderful things together in the past, right? And so I thought, I just out of the blue, I thought, I'm going to call Chris and see if she's wants to partner up on this, right? So I called Chris, and, you know, a miracle of miracles, because she's such a busy lady. She picks up. I say, I got this feeling, right? Molokai needs help. You know, this is after the Maui fires, right? And she says, oh, well, if we could do something there, maybe that would be seen as something that would help him out, right? So now we're all we're beginning to dream what's possible, right? And I thought, yeah, that's true. That's true, right? So many people, you know, suffering, stressed, lost everything, right? And a lot of that's true in Molokai, right? They've lost so much, right? They're so isolated. And so anyway, we, you know, Chris said, okay, I'm in, right? And I wrote some of the proposal, but, you know, HCEC, you know, Chris and Deb, you know, we put together a proposal, and the truth is that's what they wanted. As soon as I had talked with the project manager, we had this talk. You know how you get into these talks, they just go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. Well, that's what happened with her. And she was like, please put in a proposal. I said, well, I can't promise. Can't promise, but I feel drawn. I do feel drawn. So here we are. We're about ready to head into our second week in Molokai, right? And wow. It's like, I feel like new life is coming for me. I think I'm, you know, phasing out, you know, but I'm not, you know, thank God. I mean, it's like, it really, you know, sometimes you know, when you live a long time, right? That sense of beyond time, space, and matter becomes more real. It just becomes more real. And that's kind of how I feel like we're in this timeless zone. Yes, we're in the middle of something, and, you know, more information we get, you know, we just heard one of the staff was headed back to Hawaii and to Oahu. Yeah, anyway, I won't go in it. Pardon me, I can get off in the detail. But anyhow, we don't know what we're walking into this coming week. You know, a beloved staff member, unresponsive, having to be flown off the island. We don't know, right? But the beauty, the absolute beauty is, it doesn't matter that we don't know, because we know. It will show up with much love and understanding, and again, common sense help. You know, I loved Kathy's story about her first introduction to Sid. He's telling us that I go see the doctor, right? I said, yeah. I love that. I love that Sid was so ordinary, common sense, profound, but ordinary, right? And I took that to heart, that it is about living, just living life. And, you know, walk around, you know, my neighbors, they said, please come to any party we have because you bring the joy. I'm thinking, okay. Right? We just being ourselves, and people are drawn to it, not to us personally, right? But to that feeling. It is a feeling. There's a feeling of truth. And I heard it the first time I heard Sid on that little cassette tape, that I knew I had found what I was looking for. And that was never changed, never changed. So it's great to be here, and to see so many friends. Hi, Jane.
Thank you so much, Rita. And you made a little voice in my head say I should pump louder for dancing and music at the next celebration, because I had the thought as well, because I love music and love to dance very much so as well. So thank you for that. Next celebration, we got music and we got dancing. It's gonna be a whole breakout room.
Right.
Like we got it. So thank you so much, Rita.
Yeah.
Again, on that, the impact and what the world has been inspired by hearing the principles. Up next is someone whose story, if you haven't known, or just I just love seeing the impact she's made with helping people see this understanding, because they're the healers who help or sit in spot of where people are sick, you know, in the hospital, and that's Lynn McWright. Lynn, thank you for being here.
What a privilege. Oh my goodness. When Keith Blevins told me that I needed to come down to Miami to meet Sid because it might be the last time he would speak, it was 1980. And I rode on the plane together with Michael Finley, who became Mrs. Joe Bailey. And I stood behind Joe as he was introducing himself to Sid at the Mailman Center at the VA in Miami. And Sid said to Joe, "We've been waiting for you." So those were the words for both Keith and for Joe. Joe doesn't even remember, he says, but I heard him. When I heard Sid speak that very first time, I knew that this was for healthcare, and more importantly for me, for nurses. There was just no turning back. When I went, I think it was a year later, there was what was described as the very first annual conference. In my recollection, there were only a dozen people there. We had gone from 400 people in that Mailman auditorium to just a dozen people at our first conference. I looked around and there were chairs for 20 people, but there were only 12 of us there. I couldn't believe that so few had heard what I heard. And yet, here we are today. I had become disillusioned in my master's preparation. I went to the School of Public Health thinking I would find out about health. And all they taught us was about diet and exercise and how organizations work together. And I knew there was something more. So I was thrilled when Keith invited me to his home and met with his small group and began to learn about the principles. We've had a wonderful opportunity through the Holistic Nurses to invite Keith to come to Waco, Texas, and do a conference for us here. That was the year 2015. And at that conference, my colleague, Teresa Walding, was healed from pain that she had carried for 10 years. It just evaporated. And at that conference, I could see that I was standing on the same cliff where Florence Nightingale had stood. But instead of the dying horses and soldiers that she saw, I saw our dying healthcare system. And I knew that putting nursing, specifically nurse coaching, together with the principles would transform healthcare. And nurse coaching was a brand new area. It was only 2 years old at that point. And now it's just 10 years old. But we have been teaching a 3 principles program for nurses and licensed health professionals for 7 years. And we have, because nurses are scientific and very organized, we've had the opportunity to speak to many national and statewide organizations. Most recently, we've just come back from Atlanta, where we heard we had been invited to present 3 times to the American Public Health Association conference. And at the very last session, on the last day, and I was the last speaker, a gentleman from one of the state health departments came up to me and said that they may have work for us. It might take a year, but we all have been struggling in the last 3 years because 27% of our nursing workforce has left the profession in the last 3 years. So we're so understaffed worldwide, and it's just now beginning to turn around, but people are so looking for answers. We're still understaffed, and then violence occurs because people wonder why they're waiting so long in the waiting room. Well, where's the staff? I can't begin to know where it's going, but I love that we're back in the community again. And a lot of nurses who come to our coursework tell us that this was their last stop before they quit the profession altogether. And it's just been such a joy to see the miracles week after week after week as we meet with our students. And I know there was one beautiful nurse in Europe who we opened when we opened our school, and we were opening on 3 continents. And one of our European nurses was very despondent when her mom became ill, and so much so that she was considering suicide herself. And she hadn't, we thought, heard a single thing or had a single insight all the time that she was in class with us. And yet at the moment where it mattered, she realized what we had been talking about, and that she had something to give back to the profession. So here we are. Who knows what's next? Thank you for today.
Thank you for that share, Lynn. And do you know what it brings home for me? Just same thing like what you were saying, Rita, just following that feeling. And I see the glint in your eye when you was talking, Rita, about the running the groups and 2 weeks in, and however that feeling shows up for us, it can show up like that, or it can show up what Lynn's doing, work in the healthcare profession, just that feeling that just motivates us to do and can produce that glint, that new feeling. And no matter how long ago you say you met Sid or you heard Sid, you can still have that glint in your eye today over something new, that new feeling. And that inspires me to know that no matter what I've seen, I can always see something new tomorrow and give me that same glint that you lot have got. And I'm so privileged and pleased for the work that I'm also noticing now that Sid's sort of done in traveling and nurturing and making sure it was going out and making sure it was sticking to that same truth that he was speaking to, that I know all of you that have spoken so far are speaking from that same place, and it hits me in that same place. And when we always point to, we can always pass it on. It's not ours to give away. We point to people and tell them they've got all their own answers, and follow that same feeling, have that same trust. I think it's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful thing. And Miss Chris, I know you're going to come and spice it up a little bit more now. So yeah, you're next, Chris.
Aloha. Like Rita, it was a little early for me to get myself on camera, so I apologize, but it's certainly great to see everybody. And just, gosh, there's something about, I know for all of us, oh, shoot. The thing just came up and said, looks like you're done talking. Should we take your hand down? Yeah. Okay, back to it. You know, I just, from the time I've started to hear something about this, when I start thinking about how grateful I am that that we're all here yet to talk about this, and what we had an opportunity to see and to hear and to change so many years ago, that feeling just kind of rises up inside of me, you know, and as it does that, I might tear up. So if you do it, know that it'll pass and I'll get back to myself again in a minute. But, you know, I was lucky. Roger Mills came to Minneapolis, and Joe Bailey and I were in the same building together. We had our offices in the same building together, but we actually didn't like each other at all. And it happened that one day I was off at lunchtime, and he was going to lunch, and he said, "Oh, you want to go to lunch?" I met this woman, and I went to this thing, this event with Sydney Banks, and he didn't say Sydney Banks at the time. He just said with this guy, and I was like, "Oh, you met a woman? Oh, yeah, I'll go to lunch with you." Because I was hot to trot to find a husband. And I thought, you know, anybody that was successful and could meet somebody, I was like, oh, what are they doing? I wanna see what that is. So we went to lunch, and he was, most of the time he talked about the woman he met. And then he said, oh, and then there was this guy talking about this new thing, and I'm starting to do this in my work. And I was not even mildly interested in that. But I was really interested in the fact that he was found this woman, and she was going to come up and live with them. And it was like, oh, wow, that's great. So I left that luncheon, and he said, well, we're going to do a conference. And he sent this brochure out. The brochure, when I looked at it, was the most complicated, was way beyond my IQ level to even read what the heck this was going to be about. But Roger Mills was coming up, and I thought, oh, what is this? And so, but I thought, oh yeah, psychology conferences will be a better place to meet men than bars. That's for sure. I kept finding alcoholics in bars, you know, but so that was really my reason for going. And it happened that two of my friends were in his groups, and I kept getting this feed. It's kind of like it's like these little nuggets of breadcrumbs were out there. Not that I was going into the witch's den, but you know, it's like life was giving me these little pieces of wisdom, and I was able to hear it. Thank you, God, that I was able to. It's like, as I remember, people would say things to me. My roommate would come home, and I'd say, well, have you dealt with this yet? And he goes, no, but I feel better. I was like, what are you doing here? So I went down to talk to Joe again about this, and he got kind of irritated with me and told me if I wanted to know, I should go to the conference. So I signed up, and I signed up for 2 days because I thought if I met a man the first day, I'd want to be signed up for the second day, so it didn't look too obvious, right? So, and I was the first person to sign up for 2 days. So I was not real. I was a kind of a hot dog feminist at the time, and I wasn't really interested in any woo-woo psychological theories. And I thought psychologists in general were a little nutty. And so I wasn't really interested in any new theories, but I was interested in a man. So I figured that was always the hook. So I went in that day. And anyway, long story short, I had a huge change. And I always kind of figured I was in such a low level of consciousness at the time that I had to get this huge shift. And so I thought, wow, that's it, man. This is it. I realized, I said, oh my God, they found the cure to mental illness. And I went home and I talked to my girlfriend who I worked with at the time. And I said, look what he was talking about. And she said, oh, I know what that is. I'm going to do that too. And it was just like that. She turned on a dime, and I thought, wow, okay, let's keep moving with this. And as it turned out, it was a long journey after that, but my whole reality changed. So Joe and I became business partners, and we set up really the first true mental health clinic based on the principles in the world. And we had no clue what we were doing. We had no clue. We would, every night we'd call each other, and we'd be like so insecure. Well, this person said that, and this person said this, but you could feel this wave was going out into the community, and people were waking up to something that was happening here that was very different. It wasn't the same old thing. And as that wave went out in the community, some people reacted very poorly, and other people would come and want to learn what to do. And I remember Dr. Enrique Suarez at the time told me, I'd get so insecure and call him up, go, ah! And he said, Chris, he said, every time somebody talks bad about this or says it's weird, there's 3 other people going to come check it out. So just remember that, because that's really what happens with people. So after that weekend, now I had nothing. Remember, there's no books, there's no tapes, there's no nothing. And in those days, a long distance call was something you rarely did. So, you know, it's like you'd have to get on the phone. And so it was a different world, a whole different world. And Joe gave me one Sydney Banks tape to listen to. It was a seminar in mental health. And I listened to that sucker every night. Every night I'd listen to it. And then I'd go the next day and see my clients and then see what I was going to see differently. And so much so that eventually I started talking with an A, and I thought, okay, I think I got to stop listening now because I'm starting to pick this up. But they were doing a 3-week training in Florida, and they said, do you want to come down? And we think it's a good idea for you to come down. I said, I can't do 3 weeks. I can't take 3 weeks off of work. That was like unheard of. What are you talking about? I can't afford that. I can't do this. And Roger said, well, you want to come? Come. You don't want to come? Don't come. It's like, well, I want to come. So anyway, I figured out how to do it. I went down there, and it just happened that Sydney Banks was there on vacation. And they asked me if I wanted to hear him. So now this little tape became a person, right? It's like, yes, I want to meet this guy. I want to see what he was like. And so we were at Roger's house in Florida, Roger Mills's house, and maybe 10 people there. It wasn't very many people. And I was waiting for him to come because I thought maybe he'd be levitating, or, you know, he'd have like a turban on his head, or, you know, flowing gown or something. And this wee man kind of comes in, you know, he's very slight man, came in and was the most ordinary looking guy in the world. And at the time I was 30, so he was probably 50 then. And I thought, this old man comes in, right? Now, of course, it's a spring chicken. But he came in, and there was just a presence about him. And we all sat down in the living room, and he started talking, and I felt like I was stuck to the chair. Like I couldn't move. I had no idea what he was talking about. And then he would do this where he'd look right at you, and he'd kind of pick up on who was listening. And then he just it would be like a laser beam coming from him. At least that's how it felt to me. I'm sure everybody in the room felt that way, but that's how it felt to me. And as he did that, I still had no idea what he's talking about. And I thought to myself, well, I've already changed. I mean, I'm a totally different person than I was before. And then I realized, oh, that's not it, that there's so much more than that. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about this, is that, you know, here it is, you know, 40 some years later, 43 years later. And I'm still discovering that it's not what I think it is, isn't it? That it's so much more than that. And with that freshness and with that feeling comes an aliveness, you know. So as Rita was talking about, we're doing this new program. And as she was talking, the thing I thought about was that we shared this because we could see that it would relieve the suffering of people in the world, because it relieved our suffering, that we had to see it for ourselves first. And then we wanted to share it with the world. We didn't want it to be a career. We didn't want it to be like something we were going to do to people, or we were going to make a lot of money at it. We just wanted people to wake up to the simplicity of what Sydney Banks was pointing to. And it didn't matter where we did it, who we talked to. You want to hear about this? Okay, we'll talk to you about it. You know, it's like we weren't trying to be strategic in our marketing. We weren't like doing any of that. We were just, and to this day, what I do is just follow that feeling. So, you know, Joe and I set up the clinic because people would be sent to my clinic that I had already, and they would be sent to other people. And we felt out of integrity, we had to do it ourselves. And then we dragged Keith Blevins up there, and we brought in as many people that as would be interested. And we started to share this in the world. And then one day I was talking to Sid and I was having a meltdown. I was crying and I was so upset and I'm a bad person and I'm so mean and nasty and blah, blah, blah. And he said to me, he said, now, dearie, he said, sometimes we get in a low mood and sometimes we get in a very low mood like you are right now. He said, I think that you should move to Hawaii and set up a clinic there. I think you're bored. I was like, oh, what a great idea. Oh, okay. So I was like, okay, wonderful. And all my crying went away. And I was like, okay, this is good. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, I don't know anybody there. I said, well, how am I going to make a living there? What am I going to do? And so there was another woman that worked in our clinic and I was talking about it. She said, well, I'll go with you. And then I called up these two nurses that I was friends with from Miami, Karen Miller, who's on the call today, Karen Miller Williams now, and Susan Sikora. And I said, hey, you guys, you want to move to Hawaii and set up a clinic there? Yeah, let's go. And, you know, like that's kind of the way we were. It's the Wild West show. Like, okay, let's go. And we so trusted that feeling. We weren't trying to figure it out first and then go do it. Because if I had known what it was going to be like, I probably never would have come. Because it was an interesting experience because we knew nothing. This was a very different country. And but we knew that we had something here that the local culture had an understanding of. So that's how I got to Hawaii. And I had the luck of him living on Maui when we were here. So we got to have a lot of time with him and with our staff. And it just created such an incredible, magical experience. One of the things that Rita and I are doing is one of the people that worked for us at that time is now the psychologist in Molokai and was on the board reviewing our proposal to see if we could get it. And so he's kind of waking up again. He's gone off into his own world. And he said, you know, everything I learned back then, I still use that. I still have that understanding, but you can see him kind of waking up to something deeper in himself. And there's nothing better than that. There's nothing better than a human being waking up to this understanding, to this truth. And that's where the good stuff is. So I followed that feeling to Hawaii, and then I followed it back to Minnesota, and then I came back to Hawaii, and who knows what's coming next. I mean, I'm only 72, so I have a lot of years left. And, you know, that's just follow the feeling. That's what I can say, is that what Sid would do is just follow it and know that it's not you doing it. It's like you're just along for the ride. Just along for the ride. Have a good time doing it. Live your life. Be happy. And that's what Sid told us, is just be ordinary. Just be you, he told me. Just be you, Chris. I thought, who the hell is that? And then I'm still learning what that is. I'm still learning what that is.
Oh my God, Chris, thank you so much. Every little bit of everything you said, just so perfect. I'm so glad we have the Lipskis and the Chipmans coming up. And if you guys are inclined, I would love to hear, as part of what you say, if you have any hopes and dreams for the next 50 years. So, Marty and Amber, it's yours.
Well, my biggest hope for everybody is they partake in this truth that's here and this pathway. And my experience of the pathway from right at the very beginning was that I found that inside I had a spiritual experience. It was divine in nature. And I also found that I had a purpose in life, and I was missing a purpose. I didn't know why I was here. And when I heard Sid talk, I realized, you know what? I have a spiritual purpose, and that is to go find myself. And I also realized that everybody has this very same purpose. The essential nature, spiritual nature of everything. This is what everybody is looking for. And I had many ideas of what spiritual meant. I did not realize it was an actual living experience, a feeling that people would have. Something that touched you inside so deep that your idea of yourself completely disappeared. And the funniest story was I got so much help from so many people at the beginning in 1975. From Sid, of course, is the huge help. And then his incredible wife and his mother-in-law. And I used to sit in his living room, and his mother-in-law would sit there in her house. And I think, you know, this woman's 75 years old. And she's interested in the welfare of people and the spiritual nature of things. Now, I'm 78 now, and I'm that person that she was. And I'm, as Chris says, I'm still interested in the spiritual nature of things. I'm interested in spiritual facts. I'm interested in finding out deeper and deeper levels of consciousness in regards to forgiveness, hope, love. And it's absolutely incredible journey. Like it's so interesting, so incredible, and it's a never-ending learning. So it doesn't matter what you're doing. It's just a matter of looking deeper and deeper. So the last thing, the day before my wedding on Salt Spring Island to this wonderful woman in 1978, I was at a restaurant on Salt Spring, of course, and Sid was there. And I thought, geez, Sid's here. Good time to ask a question. And because there's one thing I love doing in the world was to listen to Sid. To listen to Sid was very special, very special. And so I walked up to him, and the typical question from me was, Sid, how do you grow the quickest? How can you really get it going? He said to me, you know what he said to me? What's happening today on this call, he said, do that. Share what you found, share your miracles, share the beauty that you see, share your friendships, share everything you've learned, share your gratefulness. He said, do that and you'll really grow. So I just want to say, did you want to say something? Or
well, yeah, when you finished.
I just wanted to say, the big thing for me is that this path is a divine path. And I think near the end of Sid's life, he really stressed that divine consciousness, divine thought, divine mind. And the results in his legacy is in this growth and sharing that everybody's doing today. And I just loved hearing what everybody's doing or has done. And stories like Kathy Casey's and so on. It's really, really amazing to hear it all. So thank you so much.
So my heart's pounding a little bit. I'm just going to say it's beautiful to hear you say that, dear. It's been really beautiful journey. So back in 75, when I first heard Sid at the first public meeting he had in Vancouver, way back then I saw Jim and Judy Wallace, who are the pictures are here on the call. They were very special back in the old days, very special people who made people feel really good and helped to get the feeling along and did so many beautiful things. And then Jim and Pam Beck were so helpful to so many people. and were some of the people that the original psychologists would have seen, along with so many other people here, Chip and Jan, where they would go and see their beautiful relationships, and they would be moved by the beauty of these people. And I got to see them, and I got to see people come to the island. I got to see the psychologists come. I got to see Roger come. I got to see George and Linda come to the island, and all people. I saw Shane, I saw Bob and Krista come. All these people, and Chip and Jan, and see everybody, and to see it, and to see the development. Because like I loved your talk, Christine. It was so funny. But back in the day when you'd have a tape, like if you had a tape in your hand, Sid would give you a tape that he would make and pass it to you, and like you were like, I've got this tape, right? But that's all you had. And I loved what Christine said about, you know, you didn't even really talk on the phone that much back then because it was an expensive thing to do. It was a whole different time, right? And seeing Sid in his green and white truck, and being in the living room, which was such a beautiful feeling of their home, the peace, the feeling of deep peace and quiet, that you would get, that beautiful feeling that's available to anybody at any time. We just might have experienced there, but it's available to anybody at any time, no matter what they've been through. And I feel in this time with the difficulties in the world, that one of the big things that I was reflecting on is forgiveness. Because in this times, in this world, there's a need for forgiveness, both for ourselves and for other people, because this forgiveness gives room for love. And in that love coming back through again in the world is what we need at this time, in a deep, deep way. And only through forgiveness really can that come about. And so I just wish for the world, what I wish for the world is that there's more of an understanding of how to be in the present, drop the negativity, and bring more love into the world. So I would wish that for the next forever. That's all I had to say.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marty and Amber. And I too wish to love, make sure this love gets out into the world, Amber. Thank you for that. Before Chip and Jan start, I just want to say thank you to everybody for being here today. And thank you for celebrating with us together, and just for what's, you know, to come from just such a beautiful space. But I think it is fitting that possibly our last share before Derek closes us out is Chip and Jan. We love you. And so over to you.
Unmute them.
Hey, you guys, I think you're muted.
No, their mute is off, but I think
Okay.
Is that
yeah.
better?
Yeah, that's better. That's
Karen,
good.
Karen.
Start
Yeah.
over.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Rob and Derek and Sane and everybody at 3PGC.
Yeah.
And just to say, when you mentioned about the next 50 years, how could anything but something amazing be coming up? Because if this is what's happened from Sid having a split-second experience and all of us having a split-second experience, who knows how amazing it'll be.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really an honor to be with everybody here.
Mhm.
Thank you to everybody. And this is kind of a more reflective stage of our life for sure, you know. And I wish I could have been here. We could have been here for the earlier part of this, but I was ill through the night, so I didn't sleep. So I thought, well, we'll do what we can. So here we are. So, you know, the word that comes to mind for me after all of these years is just gratitude. Just gratitude. I really can't believe the lives we've all had, you know. And we encountered somebody whose love was boundless, absolutely boundless.
you know, he saw what the world was, what it actually was. He saw who we actually were. And he did everything in his power till the last day of his life to get that across to the world, to end as much human suffering as possible, right? And he taught us to see, you know. By that, you know, I know there's a lot of people here who've heard our stories so much, but here's the power of this man's message. Without going into it too much, Jan and I were a mess before we met Sid. We were on the verge of divorce. I was depressed and angry most of the time. That's where we lived. That was the world we lived in, right? And then Jan, quite by accident, met Sid and came home to tell me that we really didn't have any problems. To which I went, what? And it was so hard for me to accept. But the saving grace for me is I began to see that Jan's change, this enormous change, was not just a passing thing, that it was sustained in spite of my upsets and depression and anger. The change was so real that at first it was extremely confusing. Like, how do you talk to a welder for 20 minutes and everything changes? Like, that wasn't possible in my mind, right? But that sustained change made that confusion turn to real curiosity finally. Like, what is this? What the hell is this, you know? And so I finally started to listen and met Sid at a private gathering once, and then heard him speak in public finally. And I didn't know, it was strange because from the day that Jan met Sid to our marriage being on a totally even keel was a matter of a couple of 3 weeks maybe, right? And I had no understanding of how that could be. I had no understanding of what was happening. I didn't remember thinking, I won't say this anymore, or we won't do that anymore. It just changed, right? And so I was like, what is this, right? So finally, we heard Sid speak one night. And that beautiful feeling we all know just swept over me, right? I didn't understand intellectually what it was. You know, we'd been searchers in many ways before this. None of that added up. None of that made any sense. But the next morning, I woke up really early and I felt really, really great, which was very unusual for me at that time, right? And I was sitting on our couch and Jan was on the floor. It was really early in the morning. Jan was on the floor playing with our little son, who was maybe 3. Right? And the early morning light at a steep angle was coming in the window, and it was shining in their hair. And I looked over at them, and this feeling just swept over me, just filled me with just the most amazing feeling. And I knew I was seeing a truer reality. I knew there was a difference between the reality that I'd been living in with my thinking and my background and my upsets and what I was seeing in that moment. I knew I was seeing a truer reality. And I knew that that truer reality was going to teach me for the rest of my life. And it has to this day, right? And that's the power that Sid brought to this world, right? The power for any of us to slip out of what we think this life is, who we think we are, and see who we truly are, right? And his kindness and his just his unrelenting love of sharing it. There's just nothing like it. There's really nothing like it. So we had so many great adventures. Jan and I, you know, one of the things that I've heard over and over in the talks that we have heard, excuse me, was Sid saying, just be ordinary, you know? And so we tried to take that to heart, and Sid encouraged us to start speaking and sharing. And I remember asking him, you know, what do I do now? I don't know how to do this. And he would just say, just be ordinary, just be ordinary and it'll come to you. And that's really exactly what happened. And so many miracles along the way. Like, I'm the same as Sid as far as education goes. I was kicked out of school for the last time in the 10th grade. So I remember after things changed, we had a group of friends, we built some houses together, did some things in Salt Spring. That felt quite successful, right? And one day we were having tea with Sid after dinner, and he looks at me, he says, so what do you want to do now? And at first I didn't understand him. He said, no, what do you want to do now, And I said, well, I like to get some more houses to build and learn a little bit more about how to do it and blah, blah, blah. He said, nah. He says, what do you really want to do? And I went, oh, I said, well, I guess I should go back to school and, get a degree and learn to be a psychologist or something. And he literally laughed out loud. He said, no, you don't want to do that. He said, what do you want to do? I thought, well, I love the whole thing about the workplace, that people spend such a huge part of their lives in the workplace, and a lot of it's misery, a lot of it's, fear and insecurity and competition and jealousy and, so much. And I'd watch my dad, suffer at the end of people that treated him badly at work and so on. So it just came out of me. I said, I'd like to help people in the workplace. And he said, well, just go do that. I said, no, Sid, you don't just go do that. You have to go back to school and get a degree. He said, no, you don't. And I said, okay, all right. So we were walking out to the car after that cup of tea. And I said to Jan, I said, Sid's so great, he's so optimistic, but he's delusional as well. So we went home and I got up in the morning, I think it was a Sunday morning, and we had the newspaper. For whatever reason, I flipped it open to the careers pages, and there was 2 or 3 jobs for human resource managers. And I thought, that's what I want. So I wrote this ridiculous resume. No education, no experience, right? Got this little group of friends I work with on Salt Spring. We're doing our best, right? And I wrote a cover letter with a little bit of what I thought I'd learned about human relations and people, right? And I actually got a supporting letter, I remember, from Roger. And I sent this resume off, right? And I'll be damned if I didn't get interviews, if I didn't get asked to come in. I think the first guy that interviewed me was just curious to see who had the nerve and how weird I would be to send in this resume, right? And so I did. And the second guy asked me right out, what are you talking about in terms of separate realities and how people see each other? We just had this incredible conversation, and I watched him have insights and get excited about those insights. And he hired me, and he hired me not because of who I was. He hired me because he had insights and he thought I could help him with it. And our life just exploded from there, So here I was in a Fortune 500 company as an executive. It made no sense. But none of our life makes sense in that way. It's not usual. It's not even believable to some extent, but it's just that. And so we lived this incredible life where we did that and worked with people in the prison systems, inmates, worked with people on prison staff, worked with alcoholics and drug addicts, traveled all over the world, did retreats in 10 countries, whatever. Traveled with Sid and so on. And then Sid was visiting us in Florida once, and he got sick, and he said to me, this will be it. He knew his time was limited. We were living in Florida at the time. And he said, if you're up for it, why don't you and Jan move back to Salt Spring and work with me for this last year? And there was no question in my mind. We just, yeah, we'll do that. It took a little while because we had a dear friend who was passing from ALS. But when that was done, we moved back to Florida, left everything, our business, which was huge at the time, left it with other people. And here we were back on Salt Spring again, around the magic of Sid Banks. Right? And his kindness and his sharing and his unbelievable love of all this was so amazing. And at one point, he asked us to think about starting the school on Salt Spring. He said, you don't have to do it forever, but keep it going with the simplicity for a little while. And I said, oh God, Sid, I still have all these insecurities, blah, blah, blah. He said, I don't care about that. Just go do it. Okay. And so we did. And for 15 years, people came from all over the world. And Sid was at the first couple. He helped us kick it off. And that idea, that dream of speaking with total simplicity survived through the whole 15 years of the school. Right? So when you asked about the next 50 years, I know we're running over, but I'll just be quick. Here's the thing. There's all these beautiful teachers out there now, and a lot of really great young people coming on. And that's absolutely wonderful. That'll help move it throughout the world. But the bottom line for me is that Sid left this treasure trove of his recordings and books. He left us this legacy of truth where, as with him gone, you're still feeling and hearing that voice speaking from that place, right? And so the more we can do to share that with as many people in this world as possible is actually far more than any of us could all do together to get it out, because it is that same wisdom that we encountered 47 years ago or whatever it is. His love and his kindness and his sharing still goes on. So
And we're so grateful to Elsie and Ken and Elsie,
absolutely.
the school,
Yes.
that and how huge a part of this she had to be, have faith in Sid in the beginning.
More than any of us in the beginning. Elsie was the first one to stand up in public and talk about it. So we're so grateful to Elsie and to Ken. I think of Ken as that quiet guy that doesn't say much, but when he does, it's powerful.
And just to everybody.
Yes.
And all I want to add is I still start every day listening to Sid or reading Sid, because I know it's not Sid. I'm hearing my own true self. And like, it's like an upgrade every day. There's always another upgrade, right? So, and it's still bringing amazing changes and beauty to my life. I'm amazed that there's that much, there's always more
for sure
coming in when you hear your true self. And I'm grateful to all of you.
Yeah, me too. There's so much love. And, what a life, huh? What a life.
Thank you for that, Chip and Jan. And yeah, like you said, we are running a little bit over, but yeah, just the feeling and the truth that I felt through the words of both of you, and basically everyone else that has shared this evening, all of Sid's friends, because that's what I can feel coming through, just a friendship based on the true love, and then trying to just speak from that same space of truth that we're all opened up to see. And then the more that we can just tell each other that we have all our answers, and all our answers come from behind that feeling, then just follow that, no matter how that shows up. And I think it's just been the most beautiful space. For 3 hours, we've been talking about Sydney Banks, and at the end of it, I just got that he's just an ordinary guy. How is that possible? Because it's about the feeling and the essence and the message. So I just want to, again, I want to thank all of his friends for sharing your stories, and it's moved me, it's filled me up, and yeah, what a beautiful experience for me. And I speak for myself, but that feeling is running in me right now, courtesy of what you guys have shared. So thank you for that. And I can't say wait till I see you again, but I don't know when I'm going to see you again or when we're going to have an event like this again. But if we all follow that feeling, then we'll see each other again soon. And I love you guys. And yeah, have a great Christmas and a great New Year. And look out for some more events coming up in the new year as well. Because the year's not finished. Bye, guys. Love you lot.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aloha.
Thank you.
Aloha.
Aloha.
I love you all.
Aloha.
Thank
Thank you.
See you all.
Love to all. Love to all.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Love to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Blessings.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you.
For stuff.